It worked in mice. It worked in mice.
Welcome back to It Worked in Mice, the podcast where we sift through the latest health headlines to find out what might save us, what might kill us, and what will definitely just stay in a lab forever. I'm Alex.
And I'm Piper, and today, Alex, I'm feeling particularly optimistic. I think we've got some genuinely game-changing stuff to talk about.
You say that every week. Last week you were optimistic about a study on the emotional intelligence of squirrels. Meanwhile, I'm still reeling from a headline I saw about microplastics. So let's start there, in the shallow end of the doom pool.
Oh no, don't tell me. Let me guess, they've found them in our dreams now?
Close. They might be fueling Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. Researchers are suggesting these tiny plastic particles are potentially triggering inflammation and damage in the brain. You know, that minor organ we use for thinking and existing.
Okay, that is not great. But how? I thought most of this stuff just passed through our system.
Apparently not all of it. A professor from the University of Technology, Sydney, estimates adults might be consuming around 250 grams of microplastics a year.
250 grams? That's like the weight of a hamster. A whole hamster made of plastic every year.
A delicious, non-biodegradable hamster. And while our bodies are pretty good at clearing most of it, some particles are small enough to accumulate in our organs, including, you guessed it, the brain. This new review identified 5 different ways these plastic bits could be quietly wreaking havoc up there.
5 pathways? So it's not just one thing, it's a full-on assault. What are we talking about here?
Well, they're looking at things like increased inflammation, which is a known troublemaker in neurodegenerative diseases. There's also oxidative stress, which is like cellular rust. The plastics might also be messing with our protein functions, causing them to misfold, which is a classic hallmark of Alzheimer's. They can even disrupt the mitochondria, the little power plants in our cells.
So they're like tiny little saboteurs getting into the most critical parts of our cellular machinery. But this was a review, right? So they're connecting the dots from existing research, not running a new experiment where they fed people plastic.
Correct. No one is force-feeding people Tupperware for science just yet. They're reviewing all the cellular and animal studies and saying, hey, all signs point to this being a serious problem that we need to investigate in humans. Considering dementia already affects over 57 million people worldwide, adding plastic-fueled brain damage to the mix is concerning.
It is, but at least we're becoming more aware. That's the first step, right? Identifying the enemy. For years, we didn't even know this was a potential issue. Now that we do, researchers can focus on it, and maybe we can push for better filters, less plastic packaging, innovation. See, there's a hopeful angle.
The hopeful angle is that the research is still early. The cynical angle is that we're getting this news after we've already been marinating in plastic for 50 years. It's in our salt, our tea bags, our water bottles, even the dust in our homes. Good luck avoiding it.
Okay, you've made your point. I'm officially freaked out. Can we please move on to something that doesn't involve my brain slowly turning into a Lego brick? Something lighter?
Fine. How about something that might actually be a textbook rewriting discovery? Let's talk about your hair.
My hair? What about it? Is it also full of plastic?
Probably, but that's not the story. The story is about how it grows. For decades, the common wisdom, the stuff in biology textbooks, was that hair gets pushed out from the root. Cells divide at the bottom of the follicle and just shove the hair shaft upwards.
Right, like a little Pez dispenser of keratin. That makes sense.
Except it's probably wrong. New research from L'Oreal and Queen Mary University of London suggests it's the complete opposite. Hair isn't being pushed out, it's being pulled up.
Pulled? By what? Tiny hair fairies?
Close, by the other cells inside the follicle. Using advanced 3D live imaging, they watched what was happening inside living human hair follicles in a lab. They saw that cells in the layer surrounding the hair shaft, the outer root sheath, were moving in a spiral. It's this coordinated, spiraling movement that generates an upward pulling force, like a tiny microscopic motor actively tugging the hair out.
That is so cool. It's not a passive process at all. It's an active, choreographed dance of cells. So how did they prove it?
This is the clever part. They blocked cell division in the hair bulb. According to the old push theory, if you stop the cells from dividing at the base, hair growth should stop. But it didn't. The hair kept growing at almost the same rate.
Whoa, so the pusher wasn't pushing.
Exactly. But then they messed with something called actin, which is a protein that allows cells to contract and move. Once they did that, hair growth slowed by more than 80%. That basically confirmed the pulling force from the moving cells was the real driver. The tiny motor was switched off.
Exciting opportunities for hair loss research. If you're trying to fix a machine, you need to know if it works by pushing or pulling. This could open up completely new avenues for treatments.
Or it could just be another fascinating piece of trivia that never leaves the lab. Are we going to see follicle motor oil on the shelves next to the shampoo anytime soon? I doubt it, but sure, it's a fundamental shift in our understanding. Now I'm picturing all my hair follicles doing a little spiral dance. It's kind of unnerving. All that movement and I'm still losing the battle up top.
Oh, stop. This is pure, unadulterated scientific discovery. It's beautiful. I need a second to just picture that little cellular ballet on my head. Let me just run my hands through my hair and appreciate the tiny motors at work.
It worked in mice. Worked in mice. That sounds real nice.
Sounds real nice.
Will it work for you? Let's find out what's true. It worked in mice.
Are you done communing with your follicles? Appreciating the cellular choreography? We have a podcast to finish.
I am. And I feel so much more connected to my hair now. It's not just sitting there, it's actively participating in its own existence. Okay, sorry, I'm ready. Where were we? Let's talk about something equally fascinating happening inside our bodies, the gut.
Ah, yes, the body's second brain, and apparently its own personal pharmacy. I saw this one. Researchers have found gut bacteria that can produce serotonin.
Exactly. We all know serotonin as the happy chemical in our brains, but more than 90% of it is actually made in the gut where it regulates things like bowel movements. And for a long time, we knew the gut microbiome could influence serotonin levels, but this new study identified 2 specific species of bacteria that are basically little serotonin factories.
Let me guess their names. Lactobacillus fuelgoodicus?
Hilarious. They're called Limocilactobacillus mucosae and Ligilactobacillus ruminus. Not as catchy, I'll admit, but what they do is incredible. Researchers at the University of Gothenburg took germ-free mice that had no gut bacteria and as a result had very low serotonin levels.
Poor little sad constipated mice.
Pretty much. But then they introduced these 2 specific types of bacteria into their systems. And guess what happened? The serotonin levels in the mice's intestines went way up. Not only that, but the number of nerve cells in their colons increased, and their intestinal motility, how fast food moves through, returned to normal.
So the bacteria didn't just dump a bunch of serotonin into the gut. They actually helped repair and regulate the whole system. That is pretty significant.
It's huge. It shows a direct link. These specific microbes produce a vital signaling molecule that directly impacts the host's physiology. They also found that people with irritable bowel syndrome, or IBS, tended to have lower levels of one of these bacteria.
So the implication is that you could potentially treat disorders like IBS by introducing these specific bacteria, a targeted probiotic, not just a generic yogurt.
Precisely. Instead of just treating symptoms, you could be fixing the root cause by rebalancing the microbial ecosystem. The lead author of the study said he finds it incredibly fascinating how gut bacteria can produce these bioactive molecules that affect our health. I'm with him. This is the future of personalized medicine.
Okay, I'll give you this one. It's pretty compelling. My cynical brain is already fast-forwarding to a future where every ailment is blamed on not having the right bacteria, and we're all swapping microbial samples at dinner parties. But the science is undeniably cool.
See? I knew I could win you over. And speaking of cool science, I saved the best for last. A story that involves a powerful new discovery, a simpler process, and my favorite kind of scientific breakthrough, a complete accident.
A lab mistake? Now you're talking my language. Nothing I do by accident ever results in a scientific breakthrough. Just a weird smell and a call to the building manager.
Well, scientists at Cambridge were a bit more successful. They've discovered a new light-powered chemical reaction that lets researchers modify complex drug molecules at the very final stages of development.
Okay, break that down for me. Why is modifying a drug at the end a big deal?
Because right now, drug development can be incredibly clunky. If you have a complex molecule and you want to tweak one tiny part of it late in the game, maybe to make it more effective or reduce a side effect, you often have to dismantle the whole thing and rebuild it from scratch. It can take months.
It sounds like trying to change a single word on page 200 of a printed book, and your only option is to retype the entire manuscript.
That's a perfect analogy. It's slow and inefficient. Traditional methods for making these changes, what's known as Friedel-Crafts chemistry, also require really harsh conditions, powerful chemicals, and often toxic metal catalysts, so you have to do it early on.
So what's the accident? Did someone leave a vial by the window?
Almost. They were running an experiment that was supposed to fail, but they noticed an unexpected reaction happening. It turns out all they needed was an LED lamp. The light from a simple LED triggers a self-sustaining chain reaction that forms these crucial chemical bonds, but it does it at room temperature and without all the nasty, expensive reagents.
Oh, so instead of retyping the whole book, they found a way to use a magic eraser and a pen to make the change directly on the page.
Exactly. They're calling it an anti-Friedel-Crafts reaction because it completely flips the old process on its head. It makes drug discovery faster, more precise, and way more environmentally friendly. It's a huge deal for developing new medicines, and it all came from a failed experiment.
I love it. A reminder that sometimes the best discoveries aren't planned. It's just someone somewhere going, that's not supposed to happen.
It gives me hope. From accidental discoveries in the lab to unraveling the secrets of our own bodies, it's a good day for science. We've got plastic gremlins in our brain to worry about, sure, but we also have dancing hair follicles, serotonin-pooping bacteria, and breakthroughs powered by light.
Serotonin-pooping bacteria. You really have a way with words, Piper. All right, I suppose that's all the science we can handle for today. Thanks for listening to It Worked in Mice. Try not to think about the hamster-sized amount of plastic you're eating.
And appreciate the tiny motors on your head. Until next time.
Sounds real nice.
Will it work for you? Let's find out what's true.